This is the iPhone 15 Pro, the newest Pro iPhone from Apple, and even though it hasn't been out for long, there seems to be a lot of mixed feelings about it depending on who you talk to. While the 15 Pro has a host of great new features in both the hardware and the software, there's been some issues that have popped up since its release, and in my opinion, some of those are worth listening to and some aren't. Today I'm diving into the details with this phone. I want to touch on what's actually been good and bad with it, some things that Apple hasn't talked about, and some tips for using it as well. So if you're interested in the iPhone 15 Pro, maybe you just got one of these or you're in the process of doing so, stick around and let's get into it. Hey everyone, Kyle Erickson here. It seems like every year with the new iPhone releases, there's some kind of initial problems. I think we can chalk a lot of them up to software bugs and one-off issues that we don't hear about again, but there's always one or two that seem to kick around, and I think this year will likely be no different. Obviously, there are things that Apple can't update, like the design or build of the phone, which saw quite an improvement in my opinion. They went from stainless steel that was in the 14 Pro to titanium in this 15 Pro, and visually I much prefer the brushed look to the glossy chrome of years past, especially on this color, which is natural titanium. Natural titanium just seemed like the best fit for me this year. It was either that or blue, but this color doesn't show fingerprints as much, and it pairs really well with my Starlight Series 9 watch. Moving from stainless steel to titanium has also reduced the weight a little, dropping from 206 grams last year to 187, making it feel very similar in weight to the regular iPhone. That, along with the new rounded edges, makes this noticeably more comfortable to hold than the 14 Pro, especially if you're like me and you rest your phone on your pinky finger. There's just a lot less fatigue there. Those rounded corners also make the phone appear a bit thinner, even though it's roughly the same thickness as last year, but it is just a touch smaller due to the smaller bezels around the display, which is the same ProMotion 120Hz screen as last year. The two most notable things design-wise that have functional implications are the USB-C port, which I promise I'm going to talk about in depth, and the action button, which replaces the mute switch. I have my action button set to turn on a do not disturb focus mode, which is really handy if I'm filming like this, but I do know a lot of people that like using this to open the camera app and use that action button as a shutter as well. And you can even set up your own shortcut, for which I've seen some pretty creative things like controlling Teslas and all sorts of fun stuff. The only thing that I don't like about the action button is right now you've got to long press it to activate it, which is fine in itself, but I do think that there is an opportunity to use a double or triple click, similar to how AirPods work, that could potentially give you some more options there, but just having that button in the first place is a good start. Now, this design has come under fire a little bit recently with structural issues, not so much with the Pro, but the Pro Max, where if you put enough pressure on the phone, you can actually crack that back glass, which I'm not personally worried about, considering that I don't really put my phone in situations where that would likely ever happen, and I have a case on it all the time, but I get why some people might be concerned with that. There's one other design flaw that I want to get into, but while we're on the topic of cases, I just want to take a brief minute to talk about this week's sponsor, CASETiFY. CASETiFY makes some fantastic cases. If you've been around the channel before, you've probably seen them in past videos, and I think they're very relevant to this video in particular because of those 15 Pro durability concerns, and it just seems like every year CASETiFY is improving the strength of their cases. The cases that I have here are the Impact model that is the most minimal out of the lot, but still has 4 times military grade protection, the Bounce case that offers 6 times its same protection and is a little more rugged with these EcoShock corners that absorb impact and can sustain drops from 21.3 feet, and last but definitely not least, CASETiFY's newest Ultra Bounce, which is the most rugged out of the bunch with 10x military grade protection and can withstand drops from 32.8 feet. The Ultra Bounce has 6-layer protection, so beyond the EcoShock inner lining and hardshell backplate and bumper, you'll notice more aggressive corner protection, integrated camera lens cover, and the X-shaped EcoShock lining, giving you great protection. The fantastic thing about any of these cases is they're all fully customizable on the CASETiFY site that can help you create something that is unique to you. Also, if you're into all the environmental initiatives that Apple talked about with their phones this year, CASETiFY is very similar in that a lot of their products are made from recycled phone cases, which is always nice to see and why I like supporting them. And if you head over to CASETiFY.com/Kyle Erickson today, you can get 15% off your order. Cases will almost certainly sort out any issues with drops or breaks, but there is one other thing that I want to address in terms of the design, specifically with the titanium. There are some early reports saying that there are overheating problems with the iPhone 15 Pro and the Pro Max, and while I haven't experienced anything out of the ordinary personally, there's a lot of information floating around out there or guesses as to why this might be happening. The first thing that I saw suggested was it could be a quality control issue with the new A17 Pro chip or with the new titanium design, but now Apple is saying it's just software related and a bug with apps not working in iOS 17 correctly. And honestly, if I had to believe anything here, I'd probably say it is a software issue for a couple of reasons. First things first, the only titanium in the actual phone is mostly along the sides and the outside of the housing, and that's roughly only a millimeter thick. The majority of the phone outside of the boards and the internal components is still aluminum, so I don't think that change in material is causing any heat problems. To add on to that, as someone who has worked on my fair share of iOS apps, it's fairly easy for unoptimized apps to both heat up your phone and eat the battery. And it seems like the main culprit for most people has been Instagram, which is now apparently patched up. So as far as those heat concerns go, I think we'll likely see some of that subside, but like I said, I've personally never felt that or any performance deficiencies on the 15 Pro. The A17 chip is about 15% faster in CPU speed over last year, which really isn't going to make a huge difference and probably won't be noticeable in doing everyday things. For years now, just doing everyday tasks and scrolling social media, consuming content, and switching between multiple apps has been pretty seamless. And for those types of use cases, even a 3 or 4 year old iPhone probably won't feel much different. Where the A17 is probably going to make the most difference to me is in two places: gaming and in the camera app. Apple says there's about a 20% increase in performance and an extra core in this GPU versus the A16 that's in the 14 Pro and the regular 15, which I did confirm to be true while I was benchmarking and testing. For any games in the Apple Arcade, you likely won't notice much, but for more demanding ones like Genshin Impact, it's noticeably smoother on the 15 Pro. There's also supposed to be more power-hungry games like Assassin's Creed coming to the iPhone, so that could make a difference, but honestly what excites me most about the added power of this chip is using it for the camera. You still got the same lenses as last year. There's a 48 megapixel main sensor, 12 megapixel ultra wide, and a 12 megapixel telephoto. This is just the Pro model, so you don't get that new Tetra Prism 5x lens, which I'm not that concerned with. The fun stuff is when you get into the software, where in the camera app you'll find a couple of added focal lengths on the main lens, cycling between 24, 28, and 35 millimeters. I'm not sure how much your average person is going to cycle between those, as they offer just slight differences between each focal length. But interestingly enough, they're all 24 megapixel images, so there's no crop when you're zooming into 28 or 35 millimeters. I talked about those 24 megapixel images last week, but where last year the 48 megapixel image in the iPhone 14 Pro would bin down to 12, this year it's taking the light information from that binned image and a full 48 megapixel one and using computational photography to combine them in the middle at 24, so you're getting the best of both worlds there. The HDR is improved with brighter highlights, and just like the regular 15, I find that skin tones look a lot better in images. You'll also get the new auto portrait mode here that can detect a dog, person, or cat, and you can initiate it yourself by clicking anywhere on the screen, where you'll have the option to take a portrait photo in the regular camera mode by clicking this F icon. You can also do this after the fact in the Photos app as well. It does a pretty good job, especially with people and animals, separating the subject from the background. It can struggle a little bit around hair and things like this, which is pretty common, or if it's just a random object, sometimes it can kind of blur the edges if you throw on the depth effect a little bit too much, but overall it works really well. Night mode works great. Luckily it's getting to be that time of year here in Canada where you can get some night shots fairly early in the evening, because honestly I am not a night person, and as far as the other lenses go, I'd say that the ultra wide is pretty average, no different than last year really. You get some sharpness fading in the corners, which is normal, and the 3x zoom is just okay for the most part. I'm not a huge fan of that telephoto lens. I mostly just use the 2x zoom from the main camera, which is one of the primary reasons why I wasn't overly excited about the 5x zoom in the Pro Max. I'll occasionally use the 3x zoom more inside for product shots than anything else, but what I plan on using the cameras the most for on the Pro, and the biggest benefit to having that A17 chip in my opinion, is on the video side of things. You still have all the same video recording options like cinematic and action mode, but you can now record up to 4K at 60 frames per second in ProRes and Apple Log, which is kind of wild. For those of you that don't know, recording in Log essentially preserves as much information in your videos as possible, so that when you go to edit them, all that light information and color isn't baked in, and it's a little easier to work with. Recording in Apple Log, I found that you don't get all of the digital processing and sharpness Apple adds to the image, and when editing in post, it just looks a little bit cleaner in my opinion. The video out of this thing looks amazing, and I think it's unmatched compared to any other smartphone that I've tried. The only downside to recording in ProRes is that the file sizes are enormous. A 10-second clip recorded from the camera app in ProRes will take up about a gigabyte of space, which will fill up your internal storage pretty fast. And that's where that USB-C port comes in handy. As soon as you plug in an external SSD into the iPhone 15 Pro and go into video mode in ProRes, you'll see that it automatically starts recording to it. And you will need external storage connected if you want to record in ProRes in 60 frames per second in this app. The one catch with that is you will have to buy another cable or use one that came with your SSD, because the provided one that comes with your iPhone doesn't support high enough transfer speeds. The USB-C port on the Pro is capable of 10 gigabits per second transfer speeds, or USB 3.2 Gen 2, and you can not only use that for charging and external video recording and storage, but running pretty much any USB accessory that you want with it. USB hubs and keyboards work just fine, and you can also hook up monitors and TVs and get full 4K resolution, which is great if you're using this with streaming apps like Apple TV or Netflix. Those apps usually just automatically put shows or movies on the external display, and your phone just turns into a little playhead. Or if you have a Bluetooth controller, you can actually use this as a mini gaming console, which I think there's a lot of value in, especially if you travel a lot. Just to note that with external accessories hooked up, you can expect battery life to drain a lot faster. With SSD specifically, I found that the way that they work on the 15 Pro mimics the iPad Air, because that device has the same port speed and iPadOS is basically just iOS. If you want more information on how all that works and how different drives perform, I did a video about 9 months ago going over all of that on the iPad that I will link in the description. Other than that, there's the same charging specs as we had last year with a lightning cable and MagSafe, outside of the added Qi 2 support, but battery life seems to have improved quite a bit over my 14 Pro, where I get about 30 to 40 minutes longer screen on time. Just a note with battery life, something new in iOS 17 this year is limiting the battery percentage to 80%, which I do have turned on because it's generally better for your battery health long term, and that was an issue last year with a 14 Pro, so I will give everyone an update in the future with how that's going. Finally, the last thing that I want to go over is wireless connectivity, where Wi-Fi was upgraded to Wi-Fi 6E from Wi-Fi 6, which I'm a huge fan of. I generally get speeds that are about 100 megabits per second faster than my iPhone 15 with Wi-Fi 6, and there's also one other huge benefit. You'll notice that if you go into your settings and go into Wi-Fi connection, the Wi-Fi 6E mode options are automatic and off. There's no on, and that's the same with macOS as well. To my understanding, Apple doesn't have an on option because it automatically switches between the bands for compatibility and performance reasons, which is why if you option click your Wi-Fi on macOS, even if you have a Wi-Fi 6E system and a Wi-Fi 6E supported Mac, it's often on the Wi-Fi 6 5 gig band to work with everything else. With my iPhone 15 Pro, iPad Pro, and M2 Max Studio all running on 6E now, it seems to want to stick on the 6 gig band a lot more now, which generally has a lot better performance, at least in my setup, so that's a huge win in my books. Overall, I think the iPhone 15 Pro is great for some people who are looking for pro features like enhanced video options, high transfer speeds on the USB-C port, and the ProMotion display, but for casual use only, I still prefer the iPhone 15. That has very similar photo quality, it's a bit lighter and cheaper, but again, that comes at the expense of slower refresh rates on the display. There's no ProRAW, ProRes, or titanium, and one less camera lens as well. As far as the concerns with heat and durability, I think that's likely a little bit overblown and will get better over time, but honestly, I've never had an issue with that on the 15 Pro, and I much prefer it over the 14 Pro. That being said, I would love to know what everyone else thinks. Did you buy the 15 Pro or the Pro Max, and have you had any heat issues? Also, I'm super curious to hear what everyone else is using their action button for, so please drop a comment down below and let me know. That is it for me today. I hope you found this video useful or entertaining. If you did, feel free to hit that like button. If you want to see more tech-related content or play air guitar to hair metal with me in slow motion in a Pontiac Trans Am, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next upload.